find out limits to myself, limits to the human soul. And every day I'm trying to see if I have limits.
He's an endurance athlete, he's a Navy SEAL, and he's considered the toughest man alive.
I started doing this triathlons and endurance sports, ultra runs, just to test my soul, to see what I'm about, to see in a 150-mile race at mile 75 when I feel really bad. That's when you know. That's the only time you can find out what the human body is all about, what you're made of.
David Goggins was supposed to be a statistic. But how did he develop the grit to become these things? Now, if we look back at his environment, in his environment, his father was extremely abusive when growing up. He was also discriminated against throughout his younger years. And then one day, he actually found motivation. He found the motivation to actually try to become a paratrooper. And when he actually tried to go out for becoming a paratrooper, he actually found out that he had a specific trait which would allow him to perhaps die instantaneously because of over-exhaustion. So what did he do? He was given the option to go back to do water rescue or to select a different job in the Air Force. He chose to opt out and pick a different job in the Air Force. Just like all the other times in his life, he gave up when things got too hard. But when he got out of the military, he went back home and started spraying for cockroaches. He actually became extremely overweight. Then one day, he actually saw this documentary on Navy SEALs. And he said right then and there, this is where I change. So what did he do? He actually went to a recruiter and said he wanted to be a Navy SEAL. He was obviously extremely overweight at the time and had to lose a massive amount of weight to be able to even be considered into going into Navy SEAL school. So David Goggins always had this theme in his life, this repetitive theme in which if he failed, he would have to continue pushing forward, but most of the time he would give up. But going through Navy SEAL training was different. This time it was completely different. He didn't fail once, but he failed twice and had to restart Navy SEAL school, not particularly on his behalf, but because his body was failing him and he had that mentality that he would not give up. He did not want to return to spraying for cockroaches and let that being the rest of his life. So he finally made it into becoming a Navy SEAL and had a tremendous career as a Navy SEAL to the point to where he was actually a recruiter for the Navy SEALs and a spokesman for the Navy SEAls, and actually tried to go into Ranger school just before he got out. He was always up for the challenge. So much so he didn't want to do more than just be a Navy SEAL. So he looked for what was the most toughest race on earth, and he found ultra marathons. And so he started running ultra marathons. But to qualify for the first ultra marathon, he actually had to run 24 hours straight, 100 miles in 24 hours. And with absolutely no training, he had but a couple days to prep for this run. And up to this point, he hadn't even been running whatsoever, but just training heavily in the gym. So what did he do? He still went out there and ran the track. And it completely tore his body apart. It broke him down. It challenged him yet again in his life. But he made it. He made it in 18 hours. He ran the 101 miles in 18 hours. And he ended up getting into the first ultra marathon and placing extremely high for someone just getting into ultra marathons. David Goggins continues to challenge himself to this day. And like I've always said, there are two different things to developing grit in life. One is your environment, and the next one is challenging yourself. And David Goggins proves this. Yes, your environment can build grit, but it's still a choice. David Goggins could have still been a statistic. He could have still stayed there and sprayed for cockroaches and just let that be his life. Then character would have only been built up so much. His grit only would have been built up so much. But he did more than that. He became a SEAL. He became an ultra marathon runner. He challenged himself. He continues to challenge himself even to this day. because he just says he doesn't want to get soft, and with good reason. He came from a tough upbringing. He could have been a statistic, because when you get soft, you get lax. You forget where you come from, and you don't choose to challenge yourself to continue to build that grit. And he continues to do that every single day, to challenge yourself, to realize that if you really want to be a strong individual, you have to constantly be challenging yourself. So whether it's environment or whether you go out and choose to find an experience that will challenge you so much that you will build character once you go through it, this is how you develop grit. So develop your grit like David Goggins.